Police lights were already flashing when the HOA president pointed straight at me and said, "That's him. He doesn't belong here." Neighbors stood in a half circle, phones raised, whispering like the verdict was already decided. Someone laughed. Someone said, "Another trespasser." The HOA president didn't lower her voice. She wanted everyone to hear it. "You are not in this HOA," she snapped. "You're standing on private property." I looked around. Quiet. Calm. The ground beneath my feet hadn't changed. But suddenly, standing on it felt illegal, at least in their eyes. A police officer stepped forward. "Sir, we got a call saying you're refusing to leave HOA-controlled land." The president crossed her arms, confident. Smiling. Like this was already over. I didn't argue. Didn't raise my voice. Didn't explain. That seemed to annoy them even more. "See," she said to the officer. "He knows he's wrong." The crowd leaned in. Phones zoomed closer. Someone whispered, "He's about to get arrested." The officer looked at me and asked the question that decided everything. "Do you have any proof you're allowed to be here?" I took a slow breath. And nodded. The silence that followed was heavier than the sirens. "Before we continue, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city or country in the comments and let's see how far this story reaches. If you believe that truth doesn't need to shout to win, hit that like button. And if you're tired of seeing authority abused while quiet people get pushed around, subscribe to this channel. Because here, we tell stories where evidence beats ego. Where silence speaks louder than threats. And where justice, no matter how delayed, always finds its way to the surface. Now, let's continue. I wasn't there to argue with anyone. No signs. No protests. No loud conversations. Just me, standing quietly near the edge of the property, looking at the land I'd come to check on, nothing more. The kind of visit most people would never notice, and definitely never care about. But this neighborhood cared about everything. The houses around me looked identical, lined up like they were designed to watch each other. Fresh paint. Trimmed lawns. Cameras tucked into corners, blinking softly. It was the kind of place where rules didn't just exist, they hovered. I'd bought the land years earlier. No drama. No disputes. Just paperwork, surveys, and signatures that most people never think about once the deal is done. I didn't live there. I didn't attend meetings. I wasn't part of their world. And that, apparently, was the problem. The HOA here had a reputation. Everyone nearby knew it. They controlled parking, colors, fences, anything they could. People joked about it, but no one laughed too loud. Because challenging them always came with consequences. I'd heard the stories. Fines for nothing. Threats wrapped in polite emails. Letters that sounded friendly but read like warnings. Still, none of that mattered to me. I wasn't under their authority. Never had been. I wasn't dressed like someone important. No suit. No clipboard. No confidence that demanded attention. Just regular clothes, dusty shoes, and a calm expression that didn't ask permission from anyone. That's probably why they assumed what they did. The first HOA member approached with a forced smile that didn't reach her eyes. She asked questions that weren't really questions. Who I was. Why I was there. Whether I checked in with the HOA office. I answered simply. I said I didn't need to. That was the moment everything shifted. Her tone hardened. The smile disappeared. She stepped back, already convinced I was lying, or worse, testing her authority. Within minutes, others joined her. Voices stacked on top of each other, each one louder, more certain than the last. They didn't ask for proof. They didn't check records. They didn't consider the possibility that they were wrong. They saw an outsider standing calmly on land they believed they controlled. And in their world, that couldn't be allowed. So they did what they always did when someone didn't bend. They called the cops. The police hadn't arrived yet, but the HOA was already acting like they had. The president took charge of the moment with a confidence that didn't come from facts, it came from habit. She stood a few steps away from me, arms crossed, chin raised, speaking loudly enough for anyone nearby to hear. "He's refusing to leave," she said to no one in particular. "We've asked him multiple times." That wasn't true. But truth wasn't part of the process anymore. Neighbors drifted closer, drawn by the sound of certainty. Doors opened. Phones came out. Someone leaned over a balcony to get a better angle. In a matter of minutes, the quiet street turned into a viewing gallery. I stayed where I was. That seemed to irritate them more than anything I could have said. "Sir," the president snapped, "you are trespassing on HOA-controlled land." I didn't respond. Not because I was scared, but because I knew arguing would only give them what they wanted: noise. Resistance. Something they could point at and label disruptive. Silence made them nervous. She pulled out her phone and put it on speaker, narrating the situation as if she were already giving testimony. "Yes, officer, yes, he's still here. No, he won't cooperate." Each word was chosen carefully. Each sentence painted me as a problem that needed solving. When the police cars finally pulled up, the HOA members visibly relaxed. Smiles returned. Postures straightened. This was familiar territory for them. Authority had arrived. The officers stepped out, hands resting casually near their belts. Before either of them could ask a question, the HOA president rushed forward. "Thank God you're here," she said. "This man is trespassing and refusing to leave HOA property." She pointed at me like I was evidence. The officers looked in my direction. Then back at her. Then at the growing crowd. "Sir," one of them said, "can you tell us what's going on?" Before I could answer, she cut in. "He claims he owns this land," she said with a laugh. "But he doesn't. We've told him repeatedly." The word claims hung in the air. The officers nodded slowly. Not agreeing, but not challenging her either. They were already operating on the assumption that the HOA knew what it was talking about. I could feel the weight of it shift onto me. "Do you have any ID on you?" an officer asked. I handed it over without hesitation. The HOA president smirked. "See," she whispered to someone beside her. "He knows he's in trouble." The officer scanned my ID, then looked up. "And you're saying you own this land?" "Yes," I said calmly. She scoffed. Loud enough for the officer to hear. "This land has been HOA managed for over a decade," she insisted. "He's lying." The officer glanced between us. The crowd leaned in. Phones zoomed closer. The situation was no longer about land. It was about who was going to be believed. And right now, everything was stacked against me. The officer handed my ID back, but his posture didn't soften. Instead, his voice lowered, the way it does when a situation starts shifting from conversation to consequence. "Sir," he said, "right now we have a complaint of trespassing. The HOA is saying you're not authorized to be here." The president nodded sharply. "That's correct. He needs to leave immediately." Around us, the crowd grew bolder. Whispers turned into commentary. "He looks calm, but that's how they always act. Probably hoping they won't check. HOA wouldn't call the cops if they weren't sure." Each sentence pushed me further into a corner I hadn't created. I looked down at the ground beneath my feet, the same land I'd walked on countless times before. The same boundaries I'd studied on paper, marked by measurements and legal descriptions that didn't care who shouted the loudest. But none of that mattered yet. The officer took a step closer. "If you can't prove ownership right now, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the property." There it was. Not justice, efficiency. The HOA president exhaled, satisfied. This was the moment she'd been waiting for. "Finally," she said. "We've wasted enough time." She turned toward the neighbors, already reclaiming her authority. Everyone, this is why rules matter. If we let one person ignore them. Officer, I said quietly. My voice cut through her speech, not loud, but steady. He stopped. Looked at me. Before I leave, I continued, may I show you something? She laughed. Oh, here we go, she said. Fake paperwork. Every time. The officer hesitated. He glanced at his partner. Then back at me. You have something on you? Yes. I reached into my bag slowly. Deliberately. No sudden movements. Just calm. The crowd leaned forward as one. I pulled out a thick folder, worn at the edges, heavy with documents most people never bother to understand. Deeds. Surveys. County stamps. Pages that didn't care about opinions. The HOA president waved her hand dismissively. That land falls under our jurisdiction, she insisted. Paper or not. But the officer held up a hand, not at me, but at her. Let's take a look, he said. Her smile faltered for the first time. I handed him the folder. He flipped through the pages slowly. Too slowly for her comfort. What's all this? She asked, stepping closer. Property deed, the officer replied without looking up. Her confidence cracked just enough to notice. That land has always been ours, she said, louder now. Everyone knows that. The officer paused. His finger traced a line on one of the pages. This shows lot boundaries, he said. And according to this, the HOA line ends back there. He pointed, directly behind her. The crowd went quiet. That's impossible, she snapped. We manage everything past the entrance. Manage, the officer said calmly, doesn't mean own. Her face tightened. She leaned toward him. You're telling me we've been wrong this whole time? I'm saying, he replied, we need to verify. He stepped away and made a call. That's when panic set in. The HOA president began talking fast, too fast. Explaining. Justifying. Rewriting history in real time. She talked about tradition. About assumptions. About how things had always been done. But the officer wasn't listening anymore. Minutes passed. No one spoke. The phones were still recording, but now they weren't aimed at me. They were aimed at her. The officer returned. He looked at me first. Then he turned to the HOA president. Ma'am, he said, this land does not belong to the HOA. The words hit like a physical blow. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Her mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. That's not, she started. That can't be right. The officer continued. According to county records, this property is privately owned. He paused. By him. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. And for the first time since this began, the power in the space shifted, completely. The HOA president stood frozen, as if the words hadn't fully reached her yet. This must be a mistake, she said, forcing a laugh that didn't land. Our HOA has managed this area for years. The officer didn't react. Managing isn't the same as owning, he repeated, this time more firmly. He turned the folder toward her, pointing at the stamped seal near the bottom of the page. County-registered deed. Verified boundaries. Recorded survey. Each word chipped away at the authority she'd been standing on. The crowd shifted. People who had been nodding earlier now avoided eye contact. A few neighbors lowered their phones, then raised them again, realizing this was the moment worth recording. The officer radioed in again, confirming what he already knew. When the response came back, he didn't even need to look surprised. It's confirmed, he said. The land you're standing on is privately owned. He paused. By him. A low murmur rippled through the group. Not shock, recognition. The kind that comes when confidence collapses in public. The HOA president's voice tightened. That doesn't make sense. We enforce rules here. We've always. Ma'am, the officer interrupted, calm but unmovable, you do not have authority on property you do not own. The words landed harder than any accusation. She took a step back without realizing it. The physical shift was subtle, but visible. Her power was leaking. A neighbor spoke up from the back. So, he wasn't trespassing? The officer shook his head. No, he said. He was legally present. Another voice followed. Then why were the cops called? No one answered. The officer turned to me. Sir, he said, you are well within your rights to be here. He lowered his voice slightly. And I apologize for the inconvenience. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. But it was enough. The HOA president tried to recover. Well, she said quickly, even if that's true, we were acting in good faith. The officer looked at her. You reported a crime that did not occur, he said. On land outside your jurisdiction. Her face flushed. That's not fair, she snapped. We were protecting the community. By making false claims, he asked. Silence. Phones zoomed in. The officer continued, his tone professional, but unmistakably firm. Filing a false police report is a serious matter. That was when the panic set in fully. She began explaining again. Talking faster. Tripping over her own words. Pointing to invisible lines in the air where she believed authority should exist. But the ground beneath her had already shifted. Another officer addressed the crowd. This is a civil matter that escalated unnecessarily, he said. There is no violation here. People started backing away. The energy reversed. Where there had been confidence, there was now discomfort. One neighbor muttered, I knew something felt off. Another whispered, they really thought they owned everything. The HOA president's voice dropped. So, what now? She asked. The officer answered without hesitation. Now, he said, you step off his property. The command stunned her. You're asking me to leave, she said. I'm telling you to, he replied. For a moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she stepped back. One step. Then another. Each one was visible. Recorded. Permanent. The crowd parted to make room for her retreat. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The officer handed me my folder. You did everything right, he said. Next time, you don't need to explain yourself. I nodded. Behind us, the HOA president stood at the edge of the property she'd just lost control over, still trying to process how loudly confidence can collapse when it's built on assumption instead of truth. The sirens shut off. The phones kept recording. And the land, quiet, unchanged, unmoved, remained exactly where it had always been. Mine. The moment the HOA president stepped back, something in the crowd changed. Not loudly. Not all at once. But visibly. The confidence that had filled the air just minutes earlier drained away, replaced by an uneasy silence. People who had once stood shoulder to shoulder with her now shifted their weight, pretending they hadn't been watching so closely. Phones stayed raised, but the tone had changed. This wasn't entertainment anymore. It was evidence. The officer turned back to me. You're free to remain here, he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. This is your property. There it was. Not just a correction, but a public declaration. The HOA president swallowed hard. So that's it, she asked, her voice quieter now. We just leave? The officer met her gaze. Yes, he said. That's it. She opened her mouth as if to argue, then stopped. There was nothing left to argue with. No rulebook. No fine. No authority. Just paper. And truth. Another officer addressed her directly. You should also be aware, he said, that misuse of emergency services can carry consequences. I'm documenting this incident. Her eyes widened. I didn't mean to. Intent doesn't change outcome, he replied. The crowd murmured. A neighbor near the front shook his head slowly. All this, for nothing. Someone else whispered she really thought she owned him. The HOA president's shoulders slumped. The posture that had once demanded attention now struggled to hold itself upright. She gestured weakly toward me. We were just enforcing standards. I finally spoke. Standards, I said calmly, don't override ownership. It wasn't a speech. It wasn't loud. But it landed. The officer nodded once, as if that settled everything. He turned to the crowd. There is no violation here. You're free to go about your day. People dispersed slowly, awkwardly. Some avoided looking at me. Others glanced over with something close to respect. A few looked embarrassed, like they'd been caught believing the wrong story too quickly. The HOA president lingered. She looked at the ground beneath her feet, then at the entrance sign behind her, the one with the HOA name carved proudly into stone. For the first time, it didn't look permanent. You should have told us, she muttered. I met her eyes. You should have checked. She had no response. The officers packed up. The radios quieted. The flashing lights faded, leaving behind only daylight and the sound of the neighborhood returning to its routine. One officer stopped before leaving. If anyone from the HOA contacts you again, he said, call us. Not them. Us. I nodded. As the last police car pulled away, I stood alone again, exactly where I'd been before any of this started. Except now, everyone knew. The land wasn't disputed. It wasn't controlled. It wasn't borrowed. It was mine. And the people who had tried to take it from me had been forced, publicly, to step off it. Not with anger. Not with force. But with truth. After the crowd dispersed, the street returned to its routine like nothing had happened. Doors closed. Phones disappeared. Conversations moved on. But something had changed. Not the land. Not the boundaries. Not the truth. What changed was the illusion. The idea that authority comes from confidence instead of correctness. That the loudest voice automatically wins. That silence means weakness. I stood there for a moment longer, looking at the same ground I'd walked on before, but now, it felt lighter. Not because I'd gained anything new, but because something false had finally been stripped away. The HOA never apologized. I didn't expect them to. People who rely on control rarely admit when they've overstepped. They just retreat, hoping the moment fades before accountability catches up. But this one didn't fade. Neighbors had seen it. Phones had recorded it. And most importantly, the truth had been spoken out loud by the very authority the HOA tried to weaponize. I didn't win because I argued better. I didn't win because I raised my voice. I won because facts don't bend under pressure. Land records don't care about reputation. Deeds don't care about confidence. And truth doesn't need permission to exist. I packed my folder, took one last look around, and walked away, calm, unchanged, and completely within my rights. The HOA would keep enforcing rules. They always do. But now they think twice before deciding who didn't belong. Because sometimes, the most powerful response isn't confrontation. It's proof. Stories like this aren't just about land or paperwork. They're about what happens when power meets truth and loses. If you've ever been talked down to, pushed aside, or told you didn't belong when you knew you were right, this story was for you. Drop your city or country in the comments. I want to see how far this message travels. If you believe calm truth beats loud control, hit that like button. And if you want more stories where ego collapses and justice stands firm, subscribe to Better Tomorrow. Because in the end, power panics when evidence shows up. And sometimes, the ground they stand on was never theirs to begin with.